The Australian newspaper today gave me a nasty shock. It said Labor could make former Labor Prime Minister Kevin Rudd Australia's next ambassador to Washington if it wins the election. It said that Labor leader Anthony Albanese, who's been a long-time Rudd supporter, used to be his Deputy Prime Minister, had told senior colleagues that he liked this idea. Now, if true, that's a terrible indictment of Albanese's judgment. I mean, Rudd's a megalomaniac, in my opinion. Not the ambassador type at all. Nor is he the kind of guy who could talk to both sides of US politics, which you need, after he, well, for instance, tweeted, "What happened to the Republicans? We have a traitor in Donald Trump who is backing Putin. Now we have a presidential hopefuls, while Putin invades Ukraine, too scared to mention it to avoid upsetting Trump." And let's not forget, by the end of this year, the Republicans can actually control both houses of US Congress, and here would be an Australian ambassador coming along calling their flag bearers traitors and cowards. And then there's the questions about his character, as another former Labor Prime Minister, Julia Gillard, pointed out in describing her dealings with Rudd.
And after the tactics meeting broke up, he very physically stepped into my space, and it was quite a bullying encounter. It was a menacing, angry performance.
That is utterly false. Utterly false.
Now, Anthony Albanese did today deny that he'd talked to anyone about making Rudd ambassador, although he did not, in fact, rule out that possibility.
Kevin Rudd, there's reports in the paper today you're going to make him our ambassador in Washington.
I've had no discussions about anyone being an ambassador to any place.
Okay.
Complete nonsense.
Rudd tweeted that no one had made him the offer either, although my bet is he'd be gagging to get it. But I mentioned Gillard. And I have a much, much better suggestion for ambassador to Washington, because there is one former Labor Prime Minister who has conducted themselves with dignity and with discretion since losing their job. There is one who can talk to both sides of politics, and it's not Rudd, it's Gillard. She'd like the job. That's what I'm told. She could easily give up her existing commitments in London, and she would be our first female ambassador to Washington. And Labor loves that kind of gender politics. Make Gillard the ambassador. And if that drives Rudd mad with jealousy and thwarted ambition, isn't that karma? Joining me is Annalise Nielsen, Sky News US correspondent. Annalise, you've covered the diplomatic circuit over there in Washington. You sort of know, what good ambassadors look like. How would Ambassador Kevin Rudd fit in?
Okay, so when I got a text message about this, I was driving, I'm in Wisconsin at the moment, rural road. I nearly ran off the highway when the automatic system came on and read it out to me that Rudd was being considered as the next ambassador. Look, put every single criticism that people have of his personality or him as a person aside, putting him in the middle of the Australia-US relationship would be a disaster. It is the one thing that we have ingratiated with the US right now. It's the one thing that Americans can agree on. Look at how little they get done in Congress. If you look at what goes through the legislation that gets passed, the only thing that they can agree on is that they want to push back against the aggression of China. And then we want to put this person in between representing Australia's interests. Take for what Arthur Sinodinos has done while he's been here. He's had an incredibly tough job managing the will of the Australian government, the Australian people, and a Prime Minister who's world famous for holding up a lump of coal in Parliament, at the same time as dealing with the Biden administration that still has as its official policy that climate change is the highest security threat to the US. That's been an incredibly tough line to draw. What have we seen Australia achieve in this time? AUKUS and the Quad Alliance. This is where our strength lies with the US. If we want someone to represent our interests with China, absolutely. Send Kevin Rudd to represent Australia with China. Putting him in the middle of the Australia-US alliance would be a disaster.
Now, you mentioned Arthur Sinodinos, current ambassador. His job ends next year, the replacement's then. Now, if Labor does win the election, why not make Julia Gillard the next ambassador? I understand that you have been thinking along exactly the same lines to read what you've been writing.
It's uncanny we both came to this thought, but I don't think we're the only ones thinking this too. I mean, put aside the fact that apparently Labor has been discussing this, I'd say getting well ahead of itself considering where the polling is sitting at the moment. There's still a long way to go with the election, and we saw at the last election how this plays out when they start thinking about jobs for their mates before they've done the job of convincing the Australian people to vote for them, and of course that goes for the Liberals as well. But if you want someone with a proven history of diplomacy and who can do the tough job of going in and saying what needs to be said and not airing dirty laundry in public, Julia Gillard would have a much better track record if they do want to send a former Labor Prime Minister. And there's a lot of good reasons to send political appointees. A lot of the big countries in the world won't take former diplomats or career diplomats. They want the people that can pick up the phone and call the Prime Minister and put the case forward and say this is what needs to happen, and vice versa. That's the benefit that's been put forward about Caroline Kennedy. She's very close to the Bidens, and she's a huge power player in Democrat circles, not least because of the money that comes behind it. So there is a benefit to doing that. If there is a Labor government, Julia Gillard would have that kind of grace on the world stage. She would have that in with the Biden administration. She'd be likely to manage the more difficult aspect of, especially if after midterms, as the polling goes, we have Republicans controlling the House and the Senate. And you know what? She would be the first female US ambassador. So that would be a pretty cool one to tick off too.
Annalise, the world's richest man, Tesla boss Elon Musk, is offering to buy Twitter for $56 billion, suggesting it's been censoring too many tweets. It's banned Donald Trump, for instance. Here is Musk last week.
A good sign as to whether there is free speech is someone you don't like allowed to say something you don't like. My strong intuitive sense is that having a public platform that is maximally trusted and broadly inclusive is extremely important to the future of civilization.
But you've described yourself.
I don't care about the economics at all.
Now, Annalise, commentators of the left have been horrified by Musk's talk of more free speech and all that, and Twitter's board is now trying to stop the takeover. It thinks it's a hostile one. Why this amazing reaction to a guy that just says, let's have more talk?
Well, because there's a lot of money at stake and people could lose a lot of money, but this is also going to be really critical in the years ahead about freedom of speech. And there has been this strong sense in the US that it's more conservative voices that are silenced on Twitter as compared to the more progressive voices. But also, I mean, just look at the fact that Donald Trump was taken off Twitter. I still maintain that that's going to be one of the biggest mistakes of the critics of Donald Trump. If they wanted to put him to bed, they should have let people continue to hear what he has to say. He's now been martyred, he's now been sidelined, and there's any chance he's going to come back, not least because of the fact that people aren't hearing what he has to say each day. There's more fond memories when I'm out and about and you hear from people who are dealing with a lot of the issues that they're facing in their cost of living at the moment. Inflation is really hitting people hard, and they start to remember, well, things were a lot better when Donald Trump was in power, and they forget, as many of even his supporters at the time would say, how prolific he was on Twitter and how that contributed to so much of the chaos. And so this is going to be a huge factor in the midterms, the coming election, because this is coming down to this critical issue of freedom of speech. We have a major platform that doesn't want to be treated like a utility when it does operate like one. And the hope is that Elon Musk might come in and change all of that. But people like that don't make a lot of money by going in and doing charity. There's going to be something in it for him as well. And so this is going to be the question, how much power do we put with a single person if we do allow this hostile takeover to happen? Not that we have much of a say in it, of course.